So how do you feel if I show you this picture? Or maybe this picture? Are you hungry? I don't blame you. I used to love fast food. And who doesn't love it, honestly? You know, they have McDonald's, KFC, Pizza Hut, Chipotle, um, Taco Bell, you name it, I probably had it. And probably most of us had it as well. And we don't have to feel bad for liking them. They're made that way so we can get addicted to them. The thing though is, have you ever asked yourself what they really put in those ingredients for our consume? Have you ever stopped and double check the label? And no, I'm not talking just about the calories. I'm not talking only about the fat or the protein, sugar, salt. I'm talking about more the ingredients, how many ingredients they actually put in them. And sometimes we even read names that we can't even say out loud because they're unreadable basically. Well, one day I did ask myself that question. And after doing my research, I didn't really find anything pleasant um, towards people who like to, consume fast food on a daily basis. So let me start from the beginning. My name is Sebastian, and where I'm from, we also have fast food places. McDonald's is around the world, that's everywhere. KFC, Subway. The thing though is, there's not really many drive-throughs around in Venezuela, South America. So when I came to the U.S., that around almost 4 years ago, I had that culture shock, and started eating out more often because fast food is pretty, at least in the U.S., is pretty accessible, affordable, and it's fast. Like you don't have to wait a lot for it or a long time. I mean, and if you don't want to cook or you don't want to worry about that, it's a fast way to use get something in your stomach. But the thing is, people has always thought about the U.S. as a very unhealthy. Sorry, that the people have like a very unhealthy diets, and like the obesity and stuff, and that's the general assumption of Americans. However, now that I live here, I know that that is not true, or at least not 100% true. I met a lot of people who are very healthy as well. However, as I said, the culture shock, it was very surprising, and I put myself to the task to compare the ingredients that they use in Great Britain, in England specifically, and the U.S. To see the quantity, and why there's such a big difference in between these two. But let me start from the beginning. I want to talk a little bit more about fast food as well. So the industry really started back in 1921. That's when the first White Castle was founded in Utah, U.S. But the idea didn't really take off until later. So during the Great Depression and the World War I, World War II, most Americans still used to eat at home and prepare their own meals because people didn't have really a lot of money to spend eating out.
Because my mom cooked 1,095 meals a year. That's a lot of meals.
Well, that's just what she does.
And then after the wars, um, when Europe needed America's resources, they let them use them, in exchange for money that they will have to pay for in later. And that's when America's economy went up to the sky during the 40s, 50s, and car culture as well, and people had more spending money, right? We can see some other consequences of that with other pop examples such as the Beatles, and the car culture, as I mentioned before. People were able to afford cars, and they had those drive-in movies theaters outside, and McDonald's was actually founded around the 1950s, and as I mentioned before, that's when America had the most money, and Americans in general were able to spend um, that money in eating out or their own pleasures. So when they saw those $15 15-cent burgers, and they were going out fast, they were surprised by it. So that's how basically the fast food industry started skyrocketing. Starting from there. However, in the UK, it didn't happen till much later. Just to give you an idea, the first KFC, which is the first American fast food industry, well, sorry, American fast food restaurant that opened in the UK, opened till until 1968. So it took about roughly 40 years to open use the first chain. They also had their own restaurants, such as Wimpy Bar, which was actually a restaurant slash bar, and then the burgers share the same idea as making it the mass production, so that way they will go out fast. And they that was founded in 1950s as well. But going back to the fast food industry in the U.S., there were three main reasons why um, this industry was or is still till this day very successful. So the post-war economy was one. We already talked about it. The car culture was a second, another one. But then the last one is the ingredients that they use on them, on the food that we actually consume. And this is what we're talking about. This is the whole topic. So why do we have so many ingredients, dyes? I'm sorry, xanthan gum. Why? How is this allowed, and why does this happen? So to answer that question, we have to compare the entities who are in charge or that are in charge to keep an eye on what the companies use in their ingredients. So the FDA relies on what's so-called a regulatory impact analysis. Well, the FDA, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, just to make it clear. But what that means, though, is that unless the U.S. or the FDA gets a full-on research with proof that these ingredients are harmful to us, to the human beings, they do not ban it or restrict their use in any way. And they also have to take into consideration, though, that even if they did have to ban it, the cost that would take, and an example would be having to replace that ingredient with something else. And if we're talking about preservatives, they'll have to see how expensive it would be to either modify it or create a different one to be able to preserve the food for shelf time, life, or whatever they need, right? So that's how the U.S. or the FDA takes care of that, which is basically not doing much, honestly, from my point of view. But then the UK FSA, or also called Food Standard Agency, they operate under a precautionary principle, which is quite the opposite from what the U.S. does or the FDA. So the precautionary principle operates or works in a way that as long as there's some ongoing research and certain proof, like some proof that some preservatives, some ingredients, some dyes are, I mean, to be honest though, most dyes are really bad for your body in the long term. So that's why they're mostly banned in the UK. You don't really see them. But I'm just, giving an example of like um what they need to see to be able for them to use ban them and or not just ban them, but like also restrict their use um, in most ways. And that's one of the main reasons why in the U.S. the fast food is cheaper, because the it's cheaper for them, but it's gonna be worse for us in the future. Um, and as I said, not many people see this, right? It's not really common for us to just stop in a moment, and, like, read the labels, try to see the ingredients, and it's hard to see them too because, as I said, the way they promote in the fast food industry, the way they promote what we consume is, just looking at the calories, the fats, trying to make us buy the idea that, oh my gosh, it has 50 grams of protein or 40 grams of protein, but we don't really take into consideration the amount of sodium that we're consuming as well, the sugars, and well, so on. So that's what that's how different the FDA and the FSA operate um, in the U.S. territory and the UK. But now I'm gonna go over why we should care about this. Like, why am I hearing this stuff? Um, and this all comes to what we put into our bodies. All right, and as I said, I mentioned the ingredients, the preservatives, the amounts of intake of sodium that we're consuming. But then, how does this affect us? Like, why should I be worried about this? And why should I care? One of the big issues with fast food is the bad cholesterol, also known as the LDL. So we get bad cholesterol from consuming processed meat and fried foods as well. Like fried chicken, for example, and a lot of fatty meals. And when we go to the doctor and you hear that you have bad, like, high levels of cholesterol, that's what they mean by it. Because there's also ways of having um, good cholesterol in our bodies. I mentioned the bad ones, the LDL. The good one is HDL. And one great example of how we can consume good cholesterol is, for example, eggs. Yolk is mainly fat, but it's a good fat though, and with the HDL. So if we increase our levels of HDL, we'll have healthier bodies as well. So that's one of the major things with fast food. And we can see also um, in the picture how it would affect your veins, and how having LDL, high levels of LDL, sorry, would increase your risks of having like a heart stroke or something similar. Another issue with fast food is the amount of sodium that I've already talked about sodium like 3 or 4 times in this video, but now I'm gonna mention why it's bad. So I don't know if you guys are aware of how much sodium we are supposed to consume in a daily basis. It obviously depends of how tall you are, how much exercise do you do during the week, and your weight and all this stuff. And I would say for a regular person, it would usually take. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's recommended to take no more than 2,500 milligrams of sodium. And if you guys ever get a chance to read the labels on how much sodium there is in any of the processed or fast foods that we consume, um, it doesn't go over that amount on a single meal because that would be insane. But easily it reaches the 700 milligrams or 800 milligrams even. So that's about half of what we're supposed to consume in a day. So yeah, that is bad. And what happens when we consume more than what we're supposed to? So when we do that, one of the big things that we get is water retention. So sodium comes from salt, you know, chemical compound NaCl, and the more salt we consume, the more sodium we get in our bodies. Um, and the more sodium we get in our bodies, the more water retention we get into it. And we can see in the picture um, some symptoms that come with water retention, and bloating, and that's why it's also easier to gain weight um, when you consume more salt than you should, because if you don't increase the consumption of water at the same time, it leads into obesity with time, of course. And lastly, we also have the sugar, though. That's very important, and should I say, very bad for you, because mainly the refined sugars, because they get into your bloodstream, which increase overeating and dehydration, which also leads to more cravings because the dehydration gets confused by the brain with hunger, and that's why you keep consuming like more refined sugars, or you just keep craving them. So as we can see, there's 6 different types of sugar, and the good sugars though, like the fructose. Let me give you an example. A banana has around 20 grams of sugar, but it's fructose, and that also contains fiber and water. So the fiber helps the sugar stop going into the bloodstream, and also the fructose only goes into your liver, which reduces cravings, and the fiber keeps you full for more time. So it reduces your overeating as well. So that's just like a clear example of why refined sugars are unhealthier for you, and how changing something so simple will help you um, be a little bit more healthy. And as I said, it's just hard for us because I guess we're also used to, even including me though. Like I love M&Ms, or like I love Reese's, the peanut butter, and it's just hard to stop, and like get out of the cycle. And with time, though, in practice, of course, we all can do it.